from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Tyler Kendall, I'm Joe Matthew.
Tonight, a return to regular order or a shutdown showdown in the making. After months of partisan battles, the Senate is trying to find a way to come together and fund federal agencies ahead of a September 30th deadline. But will Democrats make good on their promise to hold Republicans accountable for the president's tax and spending bill?
One big ugly bill is a complete and total failure, substantively and in the minds of the American people.
More on the messaging as new numbers reveal the public's view on the law and the new Congressional Budget Office estimates just in.
Plus, Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell remaining on the ropes with the president.
He has no plans to fire the Fed chair, but he has been very transparent in expressing his displeasure with Jerome Powell's management of the Fed and also his policies.
Lawmakers now jumping into the fray. The criminal referral made against Powell by a Republican member of Congress as Powell's predecessors renew their calls for an independent Fed.
Also tonight, EU officials are set to meet to discuss how to respond to a possible no-deal trade scenario with the U.S. We'll head to the White House for more as the administration teases the potential for more trade letters with the clock ticking down to August 1st.
And the political fight in Texas, where lawmakers now meet in Austin, poised to redraw the state's congressional maps in a bid to create 5 new winnable seats for the Republican Party next year. The current situation on the ground and the other states that could follow suit.
But we begin with the news from the CBO releasing a new estimate on the president's tax and spending law earlier today. The CBO projects the package will add $3.4 trillion to U.S. deficits over the next decade. That reflects a $4.5 trillion drop in revenues and a $1.1 trillion decline in spending through 2034. It does not incorporate so-called dynamic effects.
That news today coming on the heels of a new poll that says nearly 2/3 of Americans disapprove of the president's handling of inflation, with half saying Trump's policies have left them, quote, financially worse off. Meantime, that August 1st trade deadline date is fast approaching. And joining us now for more is Bloomberg White House reporter Akayla Gardner. Akayla, it's great to have you with us here. We've got a lot to talk about here and a lot of plates to spin. The president is, of course, looking to trump the benefits of his big, beautiful bill here. But that August deadline could start to change the mood music as we get closer, unless there are some big trade deals. Remembering tariffs were supposed to help pay for that bill that we're now hearing now from the CBO will add quite a bit to deficit spending.
Yeah, $3.4 trillion. If it sounds like it is a lot, but the White House has continued to say, and so has congressional Republicans, that they don't agree with the CBO's estimates and their accounting measures. They've been saying that for months, really undermining what has been the gold standard for estimates on congressional bills for decades here. That hasn't changed. The White House press secretary was asked about that today. She says the president is fiscally responsible. He's keeping account of the house of his house when it comes to his finances. They say that this is the largest tax cut for working class families and middle class Americans. So to them, they see it as a win, even though this deficit is clearly not a good number for them.
Well, Joe alluded to it there. Another big part of the president's agenda is getting these tariff deals done. And we actually had reporting this morning on the Bloomberg that the EU might be prepared to actually accept something along the lines of an unbalanced agreement. Akayla, what could that actually mean when we see some sort of framework emerge, if we do?
Well, for a lot of the deals that we've seen so far, especially for major trading partners, they have been unbalanced. We've seen countries agree to pay no tariffs, or in the case of China, 10% tariffs, and the U.S. put a much higher tariff on them. That is sort of the status quo that countries and this bloc, the EU, is sort of now expecting. But the EU has always said from the beginning that they were going to be prepared to retaliate. I don't know if you guys remember, they actually announced plans to retaliate before pulling them back when the president had that pause in April. Now we're coming up again on the second extension that we've seen, but the president and Secretary Howard Lutnick says this is now the hard deadline, even if tariffs go into effect on August 2nd. They're still open to negotiating, but they're saying that is the deadline. That's when tariffs are going to be imposed.
All right, a lot to watch, especially because that retaliation might hit some politically sensitive goods. Bloomberg's Akayla Gardner, thank you so much for your time tonight. And for more now, we're going to talk about a different story. A member of Congress has referred Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell to the Justice Department for criminal charges. Republican Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna is accusing Powell of perjury on 2 occasions, including during testimony to Congress over recent renovations to the Fed's headquarters. Here's part of that exchange from back in June.
There's no VPI dining room. There's no new marble. We took down the old marble. We're putting it back up. We'll have to use new marble where some of the old marble broke, but there's no new, there are no special elevators. They're old elevators that have been there. There are no new water features. There's no beehives, and there's no roof terrace gardens. Other than that, so all of the sort of inflammatory things that the media carried are either not in the current plan or just inaccurate. So, but notwithstanding that, the cost overruns are what they are.
Now, the White House today reiterated it has no plans to fire Jerome Powell. But joining us now at the latest is Bloomberg's Michael McKee. Mike, can you give us some context here? Is this letter from the Congresswoman seen as an escalation? How much weight does it actually hold?
It holds almost no weight. In any other administration, you dismiss it as a publicity stunt. But of course, under this administration, it's hard to know what the Justice Department will actually do, since they serve more as the president's lawyers. But there is little evidence of any kind of crime here. Representative Luna is basing her accusations on the National Capital Planning Board documents that the Fed filed when it first started the process, and a lot of changes have been made to those. And that's the kind of thing that happens when you do construction and you find problems like more asbestos that had to be taken out and a higher water table, because of course the Fed, by the tidal basin, is built on a swamp, and to excavate underneath it to do some of the work they're doing, they had to do a lot of extra remedial work. So it doesn't look like there's any kind of criminal activity here. And one important point, Tyler and Joe, is that the Federal Reserve, under the Federal Reserve Act, is responsible for acquiring and maintaining its own buildings. It's paying for these buildings out of its own revenues. So it's hard to see where there's fraud or who it would have been perpetrated upon.
A lot of important information there from Michael McKee. With all of that said, Mike, the president says, or the White House, by way of the president, saying that he doesn't plan to fire Jay Powell. So is he just trying to turn up the heat so he resigns his post?
I think he's trying to turn up the heat, put pressure on him. I don't know if Scott Bessent's analogy of working the refs is exactly right, because it isn't going to work for the administration. But at this point, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the president to try to fire Powell, because the Fed chair has said he will go to court. And we've seen how slowly the courts move on these challenges, especially the Supreme Court, to any of Donald Trump's actions. And this could just drag into next year, almost to the time or past the time when Powell isn't going to be chairman anyway. In the meantime, the president sets off market reaction that he probably won't like. So there's not a lot of win for him in this.
Yeah, I guess so. In the meantime, it's just a big reality show. Bloomberg's Michael McKee, we thank you for the reality check here on Balance of Power. For more on the news around Jay Powell and this latest CBO estimate, we turn to Jared Bernstein, the former chair, of course, of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. In the Biden administration, he's now senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Jared, it's great to see you, and welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. I don't know if this is an effort to build the case to fire Jay Powell or somehow prompt him to resign, but we're spending so much time talking about this renovation project. Jared, it was in fact cleared. It was approved during the Biden administration. And I just wonder if you remember this at the time, or if anybody called it out for having a problem when it was signed off on.
No, this wasn't really something I was dealing with when I was chairing the Council of Economic Advisors and trying to figure out what was going on in the economy, advising the president and the senior staff of some pretty portentous issues. There is nothing to see here. This is all pretense and pretext. The Chair Powell has done nothing wrong. Cost overruns are to be expected in this case. I mean, I did a kitchen renovation and I had 20% cost overruns. I don't think I was violating any contracts. The question here is, will the president go outside the bounds of norms, history, and any sort of consideration for, I think, what would be highly negative market impacts by compromising the independence of the Federal Reserve. That is the issue in play. We've seen this story way too many times in countries across the globe, including our own, most recently in Hungary and Turkey. The inflationary implications, the inflationary expectations from this kind of loss of independence are really bad news. So the president is playing with fire here. He's not even going to get what he wants. I mean, this is the wrong way to go about getting lower interest rates, by the way. But yet he continues.
Well, Jared, let's build on this because the administration also points to positive economic data. We got healthy retail sales last week. We saw consumer sentiment is up. Do you agree with the White House that the Fed should cut rates?
I agree with Jay Powell that the right place to be right now is wait and see. Yes, we've had data that's been positive. I think you mentioned retail sales. A couple of months before that, I mean, for the 2 months prior to that, retail sales had a negative sign in front of it. Consumer spending, by the way, through May, which is the most recent data, real consumer spending, almost 70% of GDP, is flat. It's actually down 0.2%. We've seen cracks in the labor market. We know that tariffs are beginning to show up in inflation. That said, we have a highly resilient economy, an unemployment rate of 4.1%. We've had decent gains in payrolls. So the right thing to do when you're driving through the fog, and I'm practically quoting Powell here, is to go slowly and carefully, and that's what they should do. The idea that they would cut in this meeting because the president wants them to, given the fog out there, that's really a hit against Fed independence.
Well, it wouldn't be so foggy if it weren't for this date a week from Friday, right? Jared, couldn't you make the case, I know many have, that if it weren't for Donald Trump himself and his tariff regime, Jay Powell might be cutting rates right now?
The trade war is a fog machine. I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, Trump continues to argue against himself and to make his path a lot harder. He says he wants to lower prices. Well, if you look at the tariffs, if you look at the budget deal and its impact on healthcare premiums, if you look at the deportation and their impact probably on wages that bleed into inflation, and then, of course, Fed independence, literally every action he's taking is pushing in the wrong direction if he actually wants to help working people through lower prices or help investors or borrowers through lower interest rates. And I guess it's hard for me to understand why nobody's explaining to him. I know Kevin Hassett and Scott Besson surely understand these things, but he seems like he's pretty hard to get through to.
Well, to build on the idea of tariffs, we're now expecting perhaps an expedited timeline when it comes to some of those sector-specific tariffs like chips and pharmaceuticals. There had been an idea that perhaps these sectors would be delayed to give time to reshore manufacturing. I just want to pick on your expertise for a moment. Does the U.S. have manufacturing capacity to actually bring these industries onshore in a shorter timeline?
Well, timeline is exactly the right question. I mean, obviously, it takes years to stand up even a pretty standard issue factory. If you're talking about a chip fabrication plant, now you're talking, 2 to 5 years. So nothing's going to happen with a snap of the finger. That's why the sweeping tariff agenda is actually, again, accomplishing exactly the opposite that they want to accomplish. Half of our imports are inputs into domestic manufacturing. So it actually hurts the sector and makes it more expensive for them to produce. If you wanted to make a play for some kind of reindustrialization, you'd have to be much more targeted. Maybe you'd use tariff quotas so that tariffs begin to phase in as your domestic capacity phases up. But that's not the way they want to do it because, in their reality, this works, but in their reality, up is down and down is up.
Jared, I've only got a minute, but I have to ask you about the news from CBO today and $3.4 trillion in deficit spending over a decade. What will it mean for inflation? What will it mean for our economy?
I think we'll put upward pressure on interest rates over the longer term. I think when it comes to near-term inflation, there's not that much fiscal impulse there, so maybe not too big a deal. But when you're talking about adding something between 20 and 30 percentage points to the debt to GDP ratio, and every one of those points is correlated with 2 basis points of higher interest rates, you're talking about at least 0.5% higher interest rates over this period. So this is real reckless fiscal spending. And, it's really not 3.4. It's closer to 5 once you add in the interest and you make the alleged temporary stuff permanent.
All right, Jared Bernstein, former chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors under the Biden administration and now senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Thank you so much for joining Bloomberg. Coming up, the Capitol Hill budget fight that could lead to a government shutdown when Democratic Congresswoman Becca Balint of Vermont joins us live. But first, at the president's urging, Republicans in Texas are looking to redraw congressional districts to secure more seats in Congress. We'll discuss with Erin Covey, editor of the Cook Political Report, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
There's no prohibition on mid-decade redistricting in Texas. This time, Republicans in Texas would be modifying their own gerrymander from earlier this decade that produced a 25-13 Republican advantage in the congressional delegation. But following the 2024 election and with the White House leaning on them, it seems possible they can draw additional seats. And I think it looks like they're going to try.
Kyle Kondik, the managing editor of Sabado's Crystal Ball at the University of Virginia's Center for Politics, talking about what's happening in Texas right now. Republicans planning to redraw congressional maps in the state in the hopes of securing more seats in the House during the midterms. President Trump has endorsed the move as a step to bolster his House majority by ensuring more Republican seats, telling, quote, Texas will be the biggest one, and that will be 5. Indeed, 5 seats at hand. And joining us now with the details on Balance of Power, live from our Dallas bureau, is Bloomberg's Texas bureau chief, Julie Fine. Julie, how are they going to find 5 new seats in your state?
Well, Joe, that's a good question, and it does come with some risk. Today was the first day of the special session of the Texas legislature. Now they will gather to decide how to carve up these districts once again. Again, legislators did this in 2021, and they made it so it was very favorable to Republicans. Now you do it all again. You could risk shifting some Republicans from one district into another, but they seem confident they will be able to do this. Now, a big question on the first day of the legislature is, would the Democrats even show up? They did. They are needed to have the quorum to begin this session. They were there, but did not rule out the possibility of leaving in the middle of the session. They did that back in 2003 when redistricting was on the table. Eventually, they came back and they did redistrict. Again, this will run through the Republicans because they run both the House and the Senate. The Texas Legislative District goes 30 days, Joe. However, they can do it as much as they want if the governor continues to call these sessions. So the Republicans can call them over and over.
All right, lots to watch there. Bloomberg's Texas bureau chief, Julie Fine, we thank you so much. And for more on this story, we turn now to Erin Covey, U.S. House editor for the Cook Political Report, who joins us live now in our Washington bureau. Erin, it's good to see you. I want to zone in here on what Julie was talking about Texas. Typically, states redraw their congressional lines so it coincides with the census data. That's every 10 years. Texas did theirs last in 2021. How are they able to do this time around?
Right. So there is no technical ban on mid-decade redistricting. And in fact, Texas has done this before. Back in 2003, they were able to draw a map that allowed them to pick up 5 more seats in the 2004 House of Representative elections. Now they're trying to do the same thing, and they believe they can pick up as many as 5 seats. Now, from an analysis that we have done here at the Cook Political Report and in conversations with other sources who are involved in the process, it seems like it would be easy enough for Republicans to draw a map that allows them to pick up 3 seats. However, getting to 5 seats could be more complicated and could put Republican incumbents who are currently already in safe districts in more risk next year.
Interesting. So maybe not safe for the president to assume that this would help Republicans keep control of the House.
No, it's not safe to assume, though it is clear that this push has been driven by the White House. And initially, what we were hearing from Republican members in the Texas delegation was a lot of hesitation and worry that it would affect their own re-election prospects. Obviously, the House majority is on the line. Republicans only control a 3-seat majority right now, so they're looking for any opportunity to protect that next year.
Well, so let's talk about the flip side of this, because we've actually heard from California's governor, Gavin Newsom, saying two can play that game, in his words. Is this a real threat that we should be watching for when it comes to across the country, that Democrats could perhaps make good on changing their congressional districting?
It's a good question. So in Texas, Republicans really have full control over the redistricting process. They fully control the state legislature. They have a Republican governor, Greg Abbott. But in other blue states where Democrats do control the state government, they don't have quite as much control over the redistricting process. And so what we're looking at in places like California is they have these independent commissions that have been a part of their constitution for a couple of decades now that give them guardrails against drawing really aggressive gerrymanders. And so while Newsom may say that they want to do this, in practice, it can be a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, there was a law passed 15 years ago that made this a lot more difficult for the governor of California, in this case, to take that action. Let's actually hear what Gavin Newsom said in response to the Trump administration's push for these new districts in Texas. Listen.
When Donald Trump calls in to the Texas legislature along the lines of the phone calls he made saying, find me some votes in Georgia, and says, find me 5 more seats in Texas, they're playing by a different set of rules. They can't win by the traditional game, so they want to change the game. We can act taller than thou. We could sit on the sidelines, talk about the way the world should be. Or we can recognize the existential nature that is this moment.
But he doesn't have the ability to do that. It would be an independent council that managed this in California, right? So does this advantage Republicans?
Yes, that's correct. And this is not just the case in California. Yeah. There's a lot of blue states and purple states where Democrats have ceded a lot of their redistricting power to these independent commissions that draw fair maps. However, in California, there is a world in which Democrats could try to call a special election to undo the current ban on mid-decade redistricting that's controlled by the Democrats in California. They could try to undo that, but that would be very expensive, and it's not clear how voters would actually respond to that.
Yeah, right.
In our final 30 seconds here, Erin, so today we saw a congressman resign. Republicans now have 219 seats. Democrats have 212. If there's one other state that we should be watching closely, I'd love to get your opinion. What's on the horizon as this battle really does continue?
That's a great question. I would pay attention in particular to Michigan and Pennsylvania, where there are already several very competitive House races there, 4 in Michigan alone, 3 in Pennsylvania. Obviously, potentially, we might have a lot of competitive districts in Texas. And I also want to mention Ohio, where Republicans are also going to redraw their congressional map. But there's going to be a lot of races across the country worth watching.
This is it for the session. Kind of hard to believe, or for this part of the session. It's summer recess in a week. For members of the House. They're going to get an earful or a faceful at town hall meetings when they go home?
We will see. I bet they will.
Medicaid? What's going to be the theme?
Yeah, I think the bill that Republicans passed, the Big Beautiful Bill, will obviously get a lot of pushback from constituents in some of these districts. And we've seen that both Republicans have gotten pushback and also Democrats from their own voters for not pushing back hard enough.
So this goes around. That's pretty fascinating. Erin, it's great to have you back with us on Bloomberg. Erin Covey, U.S. House editor at the Cook Political Report. We thank you as always. And coming up on Balance of Power, Democratic Congresswoman Becca Balint of Vermont will join us on the potential for a government shutdown and those new CBO numbers we've been talking about this evening. It's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Tyler Kendall, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Up ahead, we'll have more on the potential government shutdown looming and developments on the trade front. But first, some of the other top stories we're following in tonight's Power Brief. A federal judge in Boston casting doubt on the legality of the Trump administration's termination of more than $2 billion in federal research funding for Harvard University over alleged institutional failures, including anti-Semitism on campus. In a hearing earlier today, U.S. Judge Allison Burroughs raising questions about the constitutionality of the government's decision to slash the funding, called some of the administration's arguments, quote, mind-boggling. The president took to social media to criticize the judge, saying he would appeal the decision if it goes against him. Meantime, a group of professors at the university now publicly urging Harvard to resolve its clash with the president before irreparable damage, as they call it, is done to the school.
Plus, a bipartisan group of senators consisting of Lisa Murkowski, Ron Wyden, Catherine Cortez Masto, and Maggie Hassan traveled to Ottawa for talks with Prime Minister Mark Carney and other Canadian leaders ahead of the August 1st trade agreement deadline. Senator Wyden said that tariffs were a large part of the discussion, with the cost to consumers being the biggest concern. The senators said the talks were, quote, very constructive, with Carney describing the meeting as good. And the CBO released its analysis of this new legislation, which calculated that the law will add $3.4 trillion to the deficit over the next decade. This is where we want to start by joining in Bloomberg's Erik Wasson. He covers Capitol Hill. Of course, the tax plan goes hand in hand with the administration's tariff plan. There's a lot of talk here about how tariff revenue could be a revenue raiser to help offset. Erik, what did we learn from this report? Was there anything new in terms of the costs that the reconciliation package is actually going to provide?
The new score from the CBO is broadly in line with what we saw when the bill was being considered in the Senate. $3.4 trillion to deficits is probably closer to $4 trillion when you add in added interest costs to the total debt. We did see also numbers related to the number of uninsured. The new number is 10 million who would likely lose insurance over 10 years. That's due to these new Medicaid provisions. There's work requirements in the bill and also a crackdown on the way that states fund Medicaid providers. There was a bit of a change there. It was a little bit higher, closer to 12 million, but there were some provisions related to undocumented immigrants and Medicaid that were changed as far as their children and so forth were concerned. So this is reaffirming again that this bill, even though it did cut spending by 1.6 trillion or so, it did cut taxes by so much more that it will add to the deficit in the long run, despite claims by Republicans that it does not.
Despite the current policy baseline that suggested otherwise. Erik, something we talked about a lot during the debate surrounding this bill, but we also talked to a lot of Republican lawmakers and members of the administration who said the CBO has junk numbers, that you can't trust this analysis. How did Democrats react to that?
I think they really point out that the CBO director, Phil Schwegel, is a Republican. The CBO comes under attack whenever a party doesn't like what estimate that they're being given. But, they're basically doing the best that they can. Of course, they have made, been off in the past, but they're generally using, a blue chip standard economics to come up with these numbers. The number might become a little bit later when they talk about economic effects, so-called dynamic scoring, but that's probably only about 80 or 90 billion less to deficit. CBO continues to be, while not perfect, the most reliable measure, and attempts to game the baseline by claiming that extending tax cuts, which you never had permanent in the first place, cost nothing, is really just a budget gimmick.
Of course, a nonpartisan organization as well. Bloomberg's Erik Wasson was with us for each step of the big, beautiful bill becoming law, and it's great to have you with the bookend here, Erik. Thank you. Joining us now for more on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio is a voice from the Democratic side of the aisle. Congresswoman Becca Balint of Vermont, a member of the House Budget Committee and the House Judiciary Committee, is with us right now. Congresswoman, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Senate Republicans did ask the CBO, or they wanted a different score on this that included dynamic scoring, the current policy baseline, and it would reduce deficits, they found, by $366 billion over a decade. This stuff gets confusing sometimes for our listeners and viewers. Does this bill add to the deficit, or does it take away?
It adds to the deficit. These are, as Erik just said, these are gimmicks. These are mathematical tricks that they are using to make it look like this bill was not as damaging as it was. And it's clear to me, looking on my side of the building in the House Freedom Caucus, which continues to claim that they are deficit hawks, they fold every single time when it comes to really standing by their values of not increasing the deficit. And so it's smoke and mirrors. Bottom line is it's going to dramatically increase the deficit, and my children and my grandchildren, when I have them, are going to be paying for this.
So, Congresswoman, I actually want to ask you about the rescissions package that passed last week. We are expecting that it's likely the first of many, but we have heard from some that this is actually a way to bring in spending. Do you agree with that? If we're talking about a ballooning deficit spending, that perhaps rescissions could be a way to rein in funding that's been appropriated?
Once again, it's a sleight of hand. It's a drop in the bucket. When you're talking about, with interest included, adding $4 trillion to the deficit because of the bill that they passed several weeks ago, this rescission package is a drop in the bucket. And you are cutting things that voters like mine in Vermont, in rural areas, depend on. They're slashing funding for public broadcasting. That's where a lot of rural people in this country get their up-to-date information about horrific storms, about flooding. And when you couple that with the attack on FEMA, this is not good for rural America. And so, yes, you can do your gimmicks and say, actually, we're saving money. But when you compare it to what they just did, there's no comparison. And they don't want you to look at the betrayal that was the so-called big, beautiful bill. That was a betrayal of working America. And so the rescissions piece also should be very alarming to all of us who believe in the separations of powers. Because right now you have a president who wants to take away the powers of the purse from Congress. So when you look ahead, when we are making the decisions about what is funded, that is our job as Congress to do that. And then the executive branch does an end run around the authority that Congress has. This should be alarming to everybody, because we have to go together in a bipartisan manner to make those decisions. But if in the end they're just going to be drawn back, then what are we doing here? Do we have a democracy?
It's interesting because I remember Bill Clinton talking about and calling for the line item veto, Congresswoman, and I realize he was providing more information surrounding some of those cuts. But the fact of the matter is Democrats feel betrayed as well, not so much even in this case about the big, beautiful bill, but the fact that congressionally approved funding was clawed back and you had no say in the matter. Now, Russ Vought says that there's going to be more of this. If the first rescissions package passes, there'll be another bigger one. So are Democrats done? Are you stepping away from the table here when it comes to negotiating a budget for the next fiscal year? Should we be talking about a shutdown?
You know, certainly when I look at some of the remarks of my ranking member, Brendan Boyle, who will be our future chair, is my hope, you know, he has raised the alarms about this. Why should we negotiate in good faith? Why should we come together and do that hard work of coming to an agreement if in the end the agreement will not be honored? And that's what I've seen for my entire term in Congress now. This is my third year in Congress. Every single time we have an agreement, a top line agreement, it is only as good as, you know, the words on the paper, because they do not honor it. So, of course, we have to look at playing hardball, because they break the rules and then they expect us as Democrats to continue to play by those rules. And so I'm with Brendan Boyle. We gotta throw some punches here. And if it means stepping back and say, no, you're not going to have our help to do this, you're going to have to find those votes yourself.
Well, Congresswoman, part of finding these votes, perhaps if we're looking towards the future, Democrats are, of course, trying to retake the majority. And earlier today on Balance of Power, we spoke with Kyle Kondik, the managing editor of Sabado's Crystal Ball at the University of Virginia Center for Politics, about the Democrats' strategy looking ahead to the midterms. We want to play you some of that sound and ask you a question on the other side.
What's interesting about this potential gerrymander in Texas and some of the ripple effects of it is that it would open the possibility that there could, in fact, be a big wave against the Republicans next year, and that, you know, for the Democrats to win the House popular vote by several points, but Republicans might still be able to hold on the House because of new gerrymanders. So that throws the House, I think, into a little bit more uncertainty.
So we've heard from the California governor, Gavin Newsom, who says that they're just going to do the same thing, threatening to do the same thing. Would you get on board with that idea that Democrats should also be looking at congressional redistricting here?
Look, if Texas goes through with his horrific plan to disenfranchise voters in Texas, then, of course, we have to consider if they are throwing punches, we have to hit back. And we're not just going to pretend that what they're doing is not to circumvent the voter. I mean, that's what you see right now from this Republican conference in the House and certainly more broadly across the country. It is a group of people right now that fundamentally don't believe in giving people the right to be heard in the ballot box. So much of what they've been doing over the last few years is figuring out how do we disenfranchise more people so that we can win. And so is this good for America? Is this good for our democracy to have such extreme gerrymandered districts? Absolutely not. But when you have a president that seems to have no moral compass and saying, find me votes here, find me new members here, that is an indication that he's not actually thinking about the will of the voters, and he is operating more as an autocrat than as a president.
All right, Democratic Congresswoman Becca Balint of Vermont, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg. Coming up, more on that CBO report on the Trump tax bill and the criminal referral for Fed Chair Jerome Powell when we speak to Republican House Conference Committee Chair Congresswoman Lisa McClain next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
What Donald Trump and Republicans have done is to rip away health care from more than 17 million people and steal food from the mouths of hungry children, seniors, and veterans, while skyrocketing the nation's debt by more than $3 trillion and setting the country on a course toward possible bankruptcy.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Tyler Kendall, I'm Joe Matthew, listening there to House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, discussing the impact of President Trump's tax law on the nation's debt. Joining us now with reaction from across the aisle, Republican Congresswoman Lisa McClain of Michigan, who is chair of the House Republican Conference. So we're going to the top on this one. Congresswoman, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us once again on Bloomberg TV and radio. The CBO says $3.4 trillion in deficit spending over 10 years. You're going to tell me they're wrong. How come?
Yeah, well, it's the bottom line that counts, provided you know how to count. And here's just one area that they're wrong in. The CBO used the growth rate at 1.8%. Okay, historically, growth rate has been anywhere from 2.2 to 2.3%. For every 0.01% of growth that we get, you know, from 1.8 to 1.9, that's about $1.5 trillion of revenue that they're off by. If we just use the historic growth rate, let's just even come in lower at 2%, there's your savings right there. So again, it's the bottom line that counts, provided you know how to count. We haven't had 1.8 growth. Go ahead.
No, Congresswoman, I was going to say, on the heels of the CBO report, we are also getting polling about this package. There was a poll out last week from the Associated Press that found about 2/3 of U.S. adults expect that the one big beautiful bill will help the rich. I wonder why you think Republicans might be having a hard time marketing this bill and what you're telling your members as they're about to head home in August and meet with their constituents in town halls.
What I'm telling the members is go out there and tell the truth. The Democrats are lying, they're fear-mongering. When they have no plan, no vision, and no leader, that's all they can do. So let's actually take a look at the facts. The Democrats voted to have Americans' taxes almost double. Let's take a look at the facts, you know, those crazy things called the facts. The Democrats voted for the largest tax increase in possibly history. What we did was make sure that we extended the tax cut. If we would have voted with the Democrats, let's take a look at someone who's in the 12% tax bracket, those folks that are making about $48,000 a year. The Democrats wanted their taxes to increase from 12% to 25%. Last I checked, if you're making $48,000 in America, you're not exactly the rich. But that's the spin that the Democrats are putting right now. So what I'm encouraging my members, go home and tell the truth. Go home and tell them that you secured the largest tax break in their lifetime while the Democrats voted to raise working families' taxes.
I don't know if you heard Becca Balint speaking with us a bit earlier, a Democrat from Vermont, Congresswoman, but she suggested that you have betrayed members on the other side of the aisle by passing the rescissions package that clawed back congressionally approved funding. And I know that this was knocked around for a while. There were concerns about rural radio stations closing. There were concerns about USAID, PEPFAR, and so forth. It's passed. Russ Vought says that there will be more bigger rescissions packages coming. And Democrats say then we're not partners in negotiating a budget for the next fiscal year because you can't be trusted. You'll just have another rescissions package. How would you answer them? And does that mean we shut down the government in September?
We are going to have another rescissions package. I am hard-pressed, and I will debate anyone who thinks that the government runs so efficiently that we can't find savings. $9 billion. You're telling me that the government runs so efficiently that we need to continue. Listen, $1 million for voter ID in Haiti. Now, the Democrats don't want voter ID in America, but they want voter ID in Haiti. I mean, come on. It's just absolutely
What else do you
comical.
cut? If there's a second rescissions package, what do you have your eyes on?
Well, everything's on the table. So let me start with that. There is so much bloat. There is so much waste, so much fraud, so much abuse. Trust me, I think we can find some other savings for the American people who work so hard to pay their taxes. We can do better for those American people.
All right. Congresswoman, we also want to ask you about the future of Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve. You sit on the House Financial Services Committee. The administration is calling on Congress to launch an investigation into the renovations at the Federal Reserve. Do you think, and will Congress launch an investigation?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of everybody, but I think everything is on the table, and I think we're going to take a look at where those dollars are being spent. See, what we want to do as Republicans is make sure the old Reagan saying, people are getting value for their dollar. Americans work really hard for their money. We want to make sure if they give government a dollar in the form of taxes, that it's being spent wisely, efficiently, and effectively. And if it's not, you're darn right we are going to call for an investigation.
All right. Republican Congresswoman Lisa McClain of Michigan, the chair of the House Republican Conference, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg. For more, we're joined now with their reaction. It's our evening's political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, Stone Court Capital partner and Republican strategist, alongside Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Rick, I want to start with you. Just based off of what the Congresswoman was saying here about the CBO scoring, she says that it's not the correct math. What do you make of that? Is that actually something that Republican voters are going to buy when they see some of these numbers coming out from the Congressional Budget Office?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain that to a voter because you then get stuck in what all the details are around growth rates. And if you look at the first quarter of this year, the growth rates declined 0.5%. Now, that means we've added even more potential deficit to the $3.4 trillion if growth rates are below the projected number that the CBO has, which currently they are. So, I mean, it's not a winning argument. I mean, look, deficits aren't a winning argument, but the only thing that's worse than running up deficits is being responsible for a $4 trillion tax increase, which is what the Donald Trump administration said, I'm not going to do. I passed those things in 2017. We had a cap on it, but I have to make them permanent. That's what I'm going to do. It's going to cost us a lot of money, but I'm going to take the heat for it.
Well, and Lisa McClain articulated that. Jeannie, what's your take on this? You see a number like $3.4 trillion here, and Democrats think they have a pretty good story to tell. Do voters care?
They do care, but they're going to care mostly about the cuts that they feel. And for the Republicans, unfortunately, the problem is people are not going to feel the the continuation of the Donald Trump tax cuts because nothing changes about our taxes. And so that's a hard sell for Republicans. And what Democrats are hoping is that they can make the case that the cuts to Medicaid, the cuts to food programs, the cuts to rural public media, as you were just talking about, all of those cuts between the big, beautiful bill and the clawback are going to be things that people will feel. Now, Republicans Republicans did a smart thing by pushing those cuts to take effect until after the midterm, which makes it difficult for Democrats to make that case. So it's going to be, I think, a challenge on both sides. But I do think the biggest argument Democrats have to make is they have to say that Donald Trump talks a big game about caring about the working and middle class, but he delivers for the elites. We've seen it with Jeffrey Epstein. We've seen it with the big, beautiful bill, the largest tax cuts for elites in American history, arguably. We're seeing it with the kind of growth we're seeing in the deficit. That's going to be on the backs of our children and grandchildren. That's what they're going to have to say. Not easy for Democrats, but that's the case they have to make.
Well, in the background of all of this, of which we've been discussing, is that lawmakers are working on the appropriations process. And you heard President Trump calling on Senate Majority Leader John Thune to cancel that August recess, more to work on moving ahead some of his nominations. But, Rick, I'm wondering, do you think that's actually a good idea for senators if they're trying to accomplish an agenda? Are they going to be canceling flights, or is that deeply unpopular? Because that's a time when they're supposed to be connecting with their constituents.
Yeah, realistically, there's really not the work that's ready to go to do that, right? In other words, one of the bills that are probably one of the first that usually gets past the National Defense Authorization Act, I mean, they haven't even written the bill yet. And so they're going to be into September no matter what. They can stick around and swelter in the heat like we do in Washington in August, but it's not going to do them any good. So they're going to knock out these nominations and then go home. That's already set in stone.
President says long weekends as well, Rick. I think you're making the point, if I'm hearing you correctly, that they're not going to make any headway on the budget for the next fiscal year, right? The House has already got something done. What can the Senate do?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Senate started late, and they've got a lot of work to do. They've got to actually write some of these bills. They've had a few get out of committee, and a lot of them, though, still require to be put into legislative language. And that takes time. It's not an easy task to do that. And people have to be given time to formulate their amendments. The amendment process to these things is incredibly burdensome, and they have to open up a window for members to submit their amendments. And in the case, for instance, of the NDAA, that's what they're doing now. Members are submitting amendments. There's no way to finalize those amendments in the month of August and think you can pass a bill before Labor Day.
Jeannie, very quickly, is this appropriations process something that Democrats are going to be willing to shut down the government for in order to get some sort of leverage going forward here when it comes to negotiations?
Yeah, I don't think they're willing to shut down the government. I think they're asking for something that they deserve and their constituents deserve, which is that there is fairness in this process, that they have the ability to be equal partners. And when you have the OMB director saying this shouldn't be a bipartisan process, well, OK, then Republicans have to do it. But the wrinkle is they need 60 votes, and that's going to be hard for them to get.
All right, our political panel tonight, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. We thank you both so much. It's going to be a busy week here in Washington. And for more on all the stories that we talked about tonight, make sure to check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
We'll do this all over again tomorrow. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. I'll meet you back here for the Tuesday edition alongside Tyler Kendall. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.